So thank you, everybody, for coming out to this afternoon's session. I was just telling the OMS ones, and they'll introduce themselves momentarily. I don't have an agenda. I think I mentioned in the blurb promoting this meeting this afternoon that we did something along these lines in October, but when Sophia reached out to me a weekend or two ago and proposed this idea, I'm like, eureka, this is perfect timing. So, some folks on here, I don't know, maybe you're a re-applicant possibly, or you're thinking about adding DO to the to-do list come application time. And these are really important, weighty discussions. So, I actually thought it was serendipitous that we get an opportunity to hear from people with some been there, done that cred who understand the Gaucho experience and have some unique perspectives on the osteopathic medicine route as well. So, Sophia, maybe you can get us started. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience as a Gaucho, what maybe you did in between, when you were a student here or finished as a student here and you're starting the osteopathic medicine route this past fall. So, Sophia, maybe you can get us started.
Yeah, so hello, I'm Sophia Strukel. I'm from San Diego initially, and then I went to UCSB for undergrad. Um, I think for all of us, we graduated in 2023, so it was kind of like half in person, half COVID time. So I was there for my freshman year, trying to get a little bit involved in the school, but honestly, like within that first year, I didn't feel like I got as involved as I wanted to. But then my second and half of or third year, I think, were online. And I lived down in San Diego at the time, but I was working in a lab at UCSD actually. And then it came back up third year. And once I got back up for my third year, I got more involved at school. I volunteered at a program called Sidetrack, which I really enjoyed. I don't know if any of you guys are involved in it, but if you're not, I would definitely recommend being. It's really cool. You get to go to different schools and like teach little kids science modules. So I know I really enjoyed it. And then during my fourth year, I continued on with that. And then I also started caregiving. And then I took one gap year, so I applied during my fourth year, and then during that gap year, I was mainly just working on applications, and then I returned back to the lab I had worked at previously during like my sophomore year, back at UCSD. And yeah, did a little bit of traveling too, which I would definitely recommend if anyone's planning on taking a gap year, just because then once you get back into school, it's kind of a busy schedule. So take advantage of the free time if you do end up taking any gap years.
Excellent. All right. Very cool. Thanks, Sophia, for that background. Eris, you were next on that call when we were letting folks in. Would you mind kind of telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Aris, from the San Fernando Valley. I actually am not class of 23. I graduated fall of 21. Yeah, I graduated at like the height of COVID. Just rushed through because I couldn't take online classes anymore. Um, I think my journey was a little bit unconventional in that I didn't really decide on medicine or wasn't fully committed until after I graduated. So I took about 2.5 years of a gap year and doing hospice, doing some research at the West LA VA. Yeah, I kind of sort of found a passion for it. I think my story is unique, I guess, in a bit, in that I was a patient myself, and I think a lot of my motivation came from that during my time as a patient. And yeah, I think that's my story in a
And,
nutshell.
as somebody who's read hundreds of personal statements, and you probably have experienced this or heard of this in some of the conversations, maybe with your classmates there, is that
Mhm.
often is an inspiration or motivation for folks, either they're themselves, on the business end of healthcare, or really close loved ones are, and it almost obliges them in some way to kind of explore. This profession more diligently, and I love the way this is manifested for you. So thanks, Eris, for sharing that. Let's see, Hallie, you're next.
Hi guys, my name's Hallie. I graduated UCSB in 2023. I majored in neuroscience or not neuroscience, there's no neuroscience. I majored in biopsych while I was there. Um, I while I was at UCSB, I was in the Brain Exercise Initiative Club, if any of you guys do that. And then most of my patient care hours actually came from during COVID. I was living at home in Bakersfield, working in the hospital there. And then while I was at UCSB, most of my time went towards, I was on the club triathlon team. So honestly, that's what I spent most of my time doing, not really anything patient care, medicine related. Um, yeah, and then I took one gap year. So I applied during my fourth year, took one gap year. During my gap year, I worked at a PT clinic in downtown Santa Barbara. Um, kind of just hung out, traveled, did fun stuff, and really enjoyed my gap year. So that's kind
What
of my.
was the PT clinic? Because there's like three PT clinics that we work with, and they advertise with us fairly frequently, and was
I
curious.
worked at Hayashida.
Yeah, Adrian may have been the guy that you were working with down there at Hayashida.
Mm,
He's the one who frequently reaches out to me,
yeah.
and I'm gonna come back to that, Hallie, because I just sent something to the listserv relatively recently,
Mm.
and they're like a lot of students will like follow up with that email that I sent to the listserv and say, is PT clinic going to be helpful to me at all when it comes to applying to med school? And, you know, I'm always kind of speculating as to what the answer is. I think it's informed speculation, but I'd like maybe a little bit later if you could talk about, the different kinds of the clinical experiences and what, some of the pros and cons are of the different, they're scribing, MA, EMT, maybe y'all can talk about that in due course. Okay, cool.
Sure.
Thanks. And an encore performance, Lily, who I mentioned, I'd done something like this back in October, I think it was. And Lily is back for more. So, Lily, would you mind just kind of bringing us up to speed? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your backstory.
Okay, so I graduated in 2022, but I was class of 2023. I also majored in biopsych, and I did like a lot of kind of random clinical experience during clinical-ish experience while at UCSB. I did cope, and I mentioned this in the fall. I highly don't recommend. I also was part of BEI. I also worked at a physical therapy studio during COVID. And then I took 2 gap years and in college I worked a ton. I worked during my gap years and I also
We seem to have lost Lily to low tide, perhaps, but
oh no.
we're in and out. But I do want to come back to, one of the things I'm hoping we can maybe get a little bit of a better connection because COPE Health Scholars is something that I hear frequently from students, and I think you also did a little bit of a deep dive on this when we spoke the last time. I have my own kind of reservations about these sort of what maybe cynics would call pay to play kind of things. But I'd be interested in maybe a little bit later to do a greater exploration about that. Okay, so you guys are now approaching the end of your first year of med school, right? Um, and I'm wondering, I asked about OMT. Well, first off, before I even go into the sort of specifics, Sophia, let's kind of head back to you. I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine a lot of you all have friends who are in allopathic programs somewhere around the country, and maybe you're comparing notes. But can you give us, for those maybe on this call who aren't necessarily familiar with the distinction between MD and DO, and particularly the MD education and DO education, would you mind, maybe Sophia getting that conversation started just to give a real basic kind of framework for the folks who are on this call about the distinctions between the two paths?
Yeah, so I am gonna first and foremost say I think that the main distinction is predominantly just OMT. So that's something we learn that MDs don't, but I think generally like the rest of our curriculum is all pretty similar because a lot of the time DOs end up taking the same boards that MDs have to take. So we kind of have to learn everything for that. Also, like the general knowledge you know to be a doctor is the general knowledge you know to be a doctor. But yeah, we also have to take OMM classes. And so it varies from school to school
Can
how
you
long.
just tell us what OMT and OMM are for those
Yeah,
who don't
so
know?
OMM is, sorry, osteopathic manipulative medicine, and then OMT is osteopathic manipulative treatments. And so basically what that is it's just like an extra skill that you get, you learn with your hands. Mainly it focuses on the spine, and you have different types of like vertebrae that make up the spine. We learn a lot about like how to feel misalignments and things that the body does to compensate with any sort of like misalignments that you might have. And then in turn, we also learn different treatments that you can do. And I think a lot of the time it can be used for pain management, or it's just like kind of like a supplementary skill that we have that we can use if we want to. And so I think that education wise, it varies from school to school. Western specifically is pretty OMT heavy. So we have lab about 2 times a week, and then we have 2 hours per lab. So usually Mondays, Tuesdays, we have 2 hours of our OMT where we just learn about different treatments and how to feel different diagnoses. And I know that there's other schools, like there's Toro up in Northern California. They are also a DO school, but they spend a lot less time in OMM labs. So like they spend like maybe like 1 hour a week. So it kind of just ranges. But then at the end, we on our board exams, we also get tested on the OMT. So I think it's a good skill to try to keep up with, at least for your boards. And then also in clinicals, I think that you also need to know a lot of the skills as well.
Yeah, I will say, we do, and I don't know if you guys had an opportunity. It might have been kind of just launching when you guys were in the back end of your educational careers here at UCSB, but we started a collab with UCLA's David Geffen School of Medicine, which is obviously an allopathic program, but they also at UCLA Health employ DOs. And we've had a number of DO lecturers come out and talk to UCSB students, including a lecturer last fall, I think it was, who was a DO and actually did a demo with a person who's on this panel of what an OMT looks like. And but in talking with this Dr. Yao, who practices here in town, and some of her colleagues, her patient panel as a relatively new doctor is booked solid. And in a place like Santa Barbara, where there's a pretty wealthy and older aging population, Dr. Yao's colleagues have said to me, her patients absolutely love her. They specifically book her for OMT. And so, there's depending upon what you want to do, and where you're going to be located as far as your practice is concerned, there is a booming business for what you guys are learning down there with some intensity down there at Western. Okay. Eris, you said you took a little bit longer to kind of find your path. What are your kind of early observations? And I'll say the quiet part out loud, not in any way to be, derogatory, but DO is not often aspiring physicians' first choice, right? There's a reason why we had 4 out of the 130 last year who were admitted to MD programs, only 4 did not matriculate, whereas 30 of the 80 accepted DO applicants did not matriculate. So I'm wondering, though, if you could talk a little bit about some of your early observations. OMT, I had some students last time say, yeah, not going to lie, don't love it. But what are some of your early observations about the curricula? Maybe even talk a little bit more about the sort of vibe of the program down there, and just some more kind of generalized observations.
Yeah. I was one of those students who wasn't the biggest advocate. I was in the October panel as well.
Oh,
So
you
it
were?
was,
Okay.
yeah.
Sorry.
But yeah, I think my perspective on it now, and I think the end goal is to treat patients and to treat them well enough to where they can get to a point where, they're satisfied. And so if OMM can provide that, OMT can provide that, then, that's the goal. And I think at first, I was a little skeptical, and I think a lot of us were, just because we weren't exposed to and we don't really know a lot about of what it is. There's not a lot of, I guess it's not really mainstream, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so, yeah, I was pretty skeptical for the first couple of months, and honestly kind of resistant to it, which was pretty detrimental in my case, just because there's so much of it in our curriculum that, yeah, it just made it harder to learn. just started to pile up. But as I started to soften up to it, as I started to lean into it, um, like I said, at the end of the day, the patient is the patient satisfaction and health outcomes are what matters. And so if we can improve that, then that's the goal. And if OMM specifically can do that, then why not? And so in terms of where I'm at now, I feel satisfied. I actually applied to be an OMTA. Um, Go figure, right?
So
But yeah,
you're a full circle story, right? You know, the resistant late adopter who's come around.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm satisfied and I'm honestly pretty hopeful. Again, limited exposure, but I'm starting to enjoy it at this point in my curriculum.
Hallie, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I actually like OMT. I like using my hands. I think it's fun. And I think it really puts you at an advantage for your rotations. Like this sounds weird, but I feel like really comfortable touching people and like palpating people. And that's something you don't necessarily get at an allopathic school. Like you don't really learn how to use your hands. And so from what I've heard from like third years on rotations is that their preceptors are really impressed when they're like able to structurally like identify things on a patient and use their hands. And OMM just like really like requires you to have a strong grasp on anatomy. And I think that's really important for being a doctor. I've been told the best doctors are the best anatomists. And so I think OMM is really helpful for that. I'd also like to point out that like you don't have to practice OMM like in your practice as a doctor. I'm not interested in primary care. I'm not interested in practicing OMM. And so DO schools are for everyone. They're not just for people that want to be family med doctors, internal med doctors. They're for people that want to be surgeons, anesthesiologists, oncologists, everything. So just because you're going to DO school does not mean that you're limited in what you're able to practice. It's basically just an extra skill that you get, makes your hands stronger for surgery, makes your hands stronger for alleviating someone else's pain. So yeah, in that sense, I like OMT. It's like a fun PE class, and I really enjoy using my hands, and I think it's a good skill that sets you apart from your MD counterparts.
Yeah, those are great points. And I think when I was talking to y'all in October, maybe and I forget different programs had different kind of portions where they were in their curriculum. But you just mentioned anatomy, and I remember a lot of the students saying, "Man, I didn't take anatomy. I have some classmates who did take anatomy, and anatomy is not a pre-med prereq. It is for
Mm.
PA, nursing, etc., but it's not for pre-med. Much to the surprise of a lot of aspiring pre-meds who are in there maybe freshman or sophomore year as undergrads. Um, but would you say, if students are thinking about DO tracks, that anatomy puts you at a decided advantage relative to your classmates, given what nature of your curriculum?
I would say any med school you go to, taking anatomy prior would put you on an advantage. That is what is 100% my biggest struggle in school is anatomy, because there's so much content and just even having like one pass on it, being exposed to it one time before coming to med school, would be really nice. So yes, I would highly recommend taking anatomy if you can.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I don't know I don't know why it's not a prereq for medical school, and because it does seem kind of intuitive that it would be,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's a good point. Lily, can you talk a little bit about maybe again some of your observations? I really find this interesting. I love Eris' admission that he's kind of come around, and I forget exactly what your thoughts were about OMT and some of the other things maybe that your observations, how they've evolved in the 6 months since we last met.
I think Hallie hit the nail on the head, honestly. Like, pretty much said everything that I would say. I like OMT. I like working with my hands. Also, I think it's a kind of a break from like the typical didactic, like slog, honestly. And yeah, like you learn a lot of skills. I feel super prepared to go, like, I don't know, I went into med school and was, oh God, we have to touch people. I don't want to do that. Um, and now it doesn't really bother me that much. So I think it's a great skill. And yeah, you don't have to use it. It's kind of fun. Like you can use it on your friends just for funsies. and it kind of, I mean, Hallie fixed my rib like a little bit ago. It was kind of fun. um, but yeah, she hit the nail on the head. Also, want to reiterate that like DO schools are not just for family practice, like internal med. If you're not interested, I know I am not interested in doing that. Um, that being said, like, don't bag on it in your interviews, but you don't have to like, you don't have to do that. There's other paths. Like, I want to do surgery, and I'm pretty set on it, and I'm fairly confident that like if I do the right things, I can get there. So yeah, that's kind of my take on the whole thing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we met when I'll mention another UCLA Health doctor who I think she went to Midwestern. I forget exactly off the top of my head now, but she met her husband there, and she's now practicing. And he is a surgical resident. Maybe he's even in a fellowship. So, and he was told relatively early on by friends and people in the medical profession. Yeah, Dio, sorry, you've got no shot at becoming a surgeon. And he was, kind of this close that to believing that, and but persevered regardless of some of those naysayers, and is the one having the last laugh now. How big is your cohort, Sophia? We'll go back to you. How big is your cohort there?
Um, I'm not sure on the exact number. I want to say we're around like 230, but at Western, we also divide up the class. So we have a group A and a group B, and we have our didactic, like science classes all together, but then our labs, like our anatomy lab, our OMM lab, and then our clinical medical reasoning labs, we do that split in those groups. So that's like 100 people.
Okay, so pretty good sized cohort of OMS ones there. What would you say? I just had parents or open house weekend, and I had a student panel, and a lot of parents and prospective students were asking our student panelists, what are the upsides of UCSB as a pre-med or pre-health student is concerned, and a lot of kids, and it wasn't because I was there. I think they would have been answering genuinely were there no pre-health staff in the room, but a lot of them said that they have friends at UCLA and Davis and UCSD, et cetera, uh, that are pre-meds, and it's a much more competitive kind of cutthroat environment. And there's the collegiality that a lot of pre-health students enjoy at UCSB is one of the things they really like about it. Can you talk a little bit about you guys have, at some point residency match that you're looking at. And so I imagine the stakes get a little bit higher, but can you talk, and maybe we'll go to Eris for this next, loaded question, but can you talk a little bit about what the sentiment is, amongst your classmates there at Western?
Yeah, I personally really enjoy my classmates. I'm in Group A, and so 150, I think of us, maybe a little less, but I'm satisfied. I have a good group of friends. I don't feel it's competitive, but again, your mileage may vary depending on who you talk to. Um, but yeah, I think Western does a really good job of choosing students who are care, empathetic, all that stuff, humanistic. I really do believe that, and I think its students are examples of that, and I have not had a bad experience. In terms of interacting with classmates, I've never felt like, there's gunners or however you want to call it. Yeah, I think competitiveness, personally, in my experience, would be low. Again, if you ask someone else, maybe it'd be high, but yeah, I'm satisfied.
Hallie, you said you enjoy the OMM, OMT stuff, but you don't intend to use it in your practice. And I'm wondering, I know you're still very early in your kind of medical education, but and maybe this isn't a question we can also ask all four of the folks here, but what is it that you aspire to do, and how optimistic do you think you are insofar as you can be kind of objective about this question? How optimistic are you that the education you're receiving there is going to put you on that path?
Yeah, so at this point, I'm really interested in anesthesia. And so there's kind of not like a ton of room for OMT and anesthesia. Quick cases in and out. As like, it's not really clinic, not really like sit with your patient, whatever. Um, I feel very confident that I can match anesthesia. They have like several 15 to 20 matches a year, which is a really good match rate. DOs match really, really well in anesthesia. They match at good programs. Western consistently is sending people to USC, like very, very good programs. So I do think my education will be good enough to get me there. But also like I do believe that you have to put yourself out there. Like a lot of matching the residency and getting opportunities is like not what you know, but who you know. Like that phrase is a cliche, but it's true. Like you really have to reach out to people, put yourself out there. And I think that goes for any education at any school. I think the school gives you the tools and the building blocks, but like you have to take it and run with it. So if you want something, you have to go out and get it and put yourself out there. So I think they're going to give me the good education that I need to get there, but also like networking and stuff really helps you get there. And I do think the school is really good at helping you network. Um, I've reached out to several alumni just that I've gotten from contacts at my school. And so I think they're good at, plugging you in different places.
Lily, how about you? That's a great answer. What are your, and we'll get back to Sophia and Eris as far as their aspirations go, but can you talk about what you're aspiring to be and how confident you are that, and again, it does come down to something of a confidence level, all right? I mean, a lot of the kids who are applying to med school every year, they're like, I'm not going to apply to X because it's not going to get me there. I think that's a little bit whatever, presumptuous perhaps, or reductive, a line of thought. But what are your thoughts about what you aspire towards and your confidence in Western's education to help you unlock your goals?
So I would like to do surgery. If I had to pick out of a hat and I could choose anything I wanted in the world, I would do cardiac surgery, which is up there with neuro and ortho and all the super competitive specialties. So we'll see. But kind of to Hallie's point, like I I met a DO resident that is at a really, really good cardiac surgery program. And I met him through something at school and I've been running with it because you have to kind of take the opportunities, like little tiny breadcrumbs that the school gives you and like put yourself out there a lot, which is a hard thing to learn. Um, one thing that I'm not crazy confident that I'll get it, but I'm fairly confident I can do like general surgery. Um, and yeah, I don't, yeah, I'm
I
kind
love
of
your
again.
I love that point about the breadcrumbs. I mean, I was talking to parents and students. They were asking about clinical opportunities. You're a little town and, south coast of California and blah blah blah. What are the odds? And I just said, well, I use the term luck surface area, right? You're doing a combination of doing and talking so that more and more people know about you. They've heard about what you want to do, and you're actually out there doing the stuff, and you're exposing yourself to more opportunities. So when those, kind of what would otherwise seem like random encounters occur, you're poised and ready to kind of run with them. And it sounds, I think you're getting opportunities. I told the students and parents there is no such thing as a boulevard of unbroken green lights when it comes to the med school profession. You've got to hustle. You've got to get out there and make your own breaks a lot of times. Um, and cool, also awesome. Thank you, Hallie, for posting that your deets in the chat there. But you've got to make things happen. You've really got to make your own breaks. Sophia, what about you and your aspirations post education?
Yeah, so I don't have a specific field that, or like a specific specialty that I know that I want to go into, but I know I'd like to work with cancer patients. So that might be hemonc, which would be a internal medicine residency, and then I do a like oncology fellowship, or that might be something like radiation oncology or just general like diagnostic radiology. I think either way for all of those, I think the Western sets us up pretty well to match into any of those specialties. I recently went to a Zoom meeting kind of like this with panelists that were fourth years who had just matched into radiology, and they were kind of just discussing the process with us, and I feel like they all matched. So I think we actually had a 100% match rate this last year. And
Did
so
you say 100% match rate into radiology out of Western?
I don't know exactly specifically for radiology, but at least for our whole cohort had 100%.
Okay.
But yeah, I think there were five of them in our fourth years who matched into radiology. But
Wow.
yeah, and honestly, they were all pretty happy with where they were. A few of them were like down in Kaiser too, so I'm like, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
The like only one of them was just like, honestly, like my advice is like apply to places even if like you're not sure if you can get in, because one of them too, like she was the first DO that had been accepted into the program. And so I think there's also like sometimes you limit yourself. And I agree with like the sentiment of putting yourself out there, because if anything, like what I've seen is just like reach out. Why not? Like even with this, it's like I just asked you, like, hey, would you be interested in doing this? And then we were able to get this together. So
Yeah.
I definitely think that just putting yourself out there and seeing what you can do, I think that's the best way to go about it. Yeah, overall,
Yeah.
I'm not too worried. I think that they set us up pretty well. Like oncology wise, I think that the professors are really nice too. I'm in the oncology interest group. I'm on the board for that. And one of the faculty members actually reached out to the board and asked, like, are you guys interested in doing any research? Do you want any papers to write? And so he gave me a paper to write. And I'm like, wow, that's so awesome. Because I know at least like in undergrad and even at a lot of other med schools, you're trying to fight to get some like research, or it's a lot of work. You have to like cold email a bunch of professors and be like, please, can I join your lab? Like, is there anything I can do? And so the fact that Western, it wasn't like he did that unprompted and it was just to be nice. I thought that was really great. And I don't think a lot of schools, like, I don't think that happens at a lot of schools.
Yeah. That's really, really remarkable. That's a great little plug as well. Eris, what are your thoughts about, what your aspirations are and how those aspirations align with, still admittedly relatively early in your education for medicine?
Yeah, I'm honestly not too sure, but if you were to ask me today to pick a specialty, it would be psychiatry. Um, and in terms of how I feel and confidence in matching to where I want to be or going to where I want to be, I'm I'm satisfied and I feel um, confident enough to get to where I want to be. I feel supported by the school, and that and I'd like to echo what everyone else has said in terms of you have to be a go-getter. You have to, if you want something, you really have to be um, self-sufficient in a way. The opportunities are there, but you have to be willing and I guess savvy enough to go and find them. Networking's really big, as mentioned before, and yeah, I think it's important to realize that we are at a disadvantage. There's a lot of bias against us DOs. I think it's important to realize that. But at the same time, I think previous match lists have shown that we can really go wherever we want and match into whatever we want.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Um, Hallie, I'm wondering if, and it may be too early. I think we brought this up the last time, maybe. There was a guy at Midwestern in Chicago who actually, talked about clinical rotations, and that was the reason why he chose Midwestern, is because he envisioned doing all his clinicals in the Chicago area. But what are some of your thoughts? And we'll go maybe around the room. And then I really would love to get, and I don't care if they can be the most kind of elementary questions. I'd love to get input from students. I don't want to be the one driving this entire operation. This is really hopefully as much for the students that are, and upcoming applicants than anything else. But I'm wondering if you can talk about clinical rotations as a DO student and what you're envisioning those potentially looking like for you in another couple of years.
Sure. I mean, I'm not there yet. It's like I can't give you an exact answer about clinical rotations. What I do know is that Western has couple different things you can do. So one, you can just set up rotations normally. So you could just do like a month at a hospital, kind of move around in the Inland Empire. You could also do that in Orange County, or you could do that in LA County. And so you go to different hospitals every month, meet a lot of different programs. The other thing you can do is they have some longitudinal programs where you spend the entire year at one hospital. So they have that option at Memorial Health in Ventura. So you could be on the Central Coast, which is really nice. Or you could do that in Bakersfield at Kern Medical. And then I think the other one is Arrowhead. Maybe Sophia or Eris knows. That's basically all I know about rotations. The third and the fourth years seem pretty happy. And then fourth year, you're pretty much just setting up audition rotations at programs you're interested in matching at. So fourth year is a little bit more choose your own adventure, pave your own way. That's on you. School helps you a little bit, but that's every med school is like that fourth year. But yeah, I think from what I've heard, people have enjoyed their clinical education. And yeah, that's all I really know about that since we're not quite there yet.
Okay, cool. I know, like I said, I would admit I'm picking it a little early with y'all, but I didn't. I was curious if you had feedback or some insights that I know I've heard it from students who are looking at applying. Questions. I'm going to take a break here just to pause to see if there are questions, whether hand raised or just want to jump in, want to post something in the chat. Any some of these students I know are upcoming, going to be upcoming applicants. Questions from the students who are on this call, not the Western kids, but the ones who are upcoming applicants. I would think there's something in here. I've still got more questions if there's crickets. Anyone know about clinical rotations for pathology? Anyone got any info there?
I don't know about clinical rotations for pathology, but I do know Western always has a couple people match pathology every year. And so they obviously got opportunities to rotate in pathology since they did match. I don't know specifically. It is a specialty that's not like as popular, I would say, as like other ones. So I think the opportunities are more you go out there and find them, but they're definitely there because people are matching pathology from Western every year.
Thanks for asking that, Eva. And again, these are, this is the kind of stuff that, everybody here has their own kind of aspirations. Yeah, Leah, fire away.
Hi everyone, thanks for doing this. I'm applying this coming cycle and I'm considering applying to some DO schools, mostly in California, kind of like on location vibes. Just I'd like to stay local if possible. And I've had great experiences with DOs, no stigma for me there. I'm wondering if any of you guys applied to MD schools and did you make major changes on your application between the two? Do you have any tips for especially the personal statement?
Go
I
ahead,
can
Sophia.
start.
Yeah.
All right. So I honestly did something pretty similar. I applied both MD and DO, and then mainly for DOs, I was like, okay, like I know I want to go somewhere where I'd be happy living there. So that is also part of why I ended up choosing Western. I was like, I'm from Southern California. Like I know I want to stay in California. They have good match rates into California. So that's part of why I picked Western. But for actual application, like what I changed, I think I mainly kept a lot of my personal statement from my MD. I kind of looked over like some videos. I think it was like Dr. Gray or something. I looked over his videos. And then one of the sentiments there's I think it's the five osteopathic tenets. I looked over those. I tried to incorporate that into my personal statement for DO schools. And then also briefly, I think they do like you to have a bit of a tie into osteopathic medicine. So if you have some experience with that, that's really good. It's also not necessary though. I know I like personally had never seen OMM and I didn't really know that much about being a DO. I randomly looked at like who my primary care doctor was, and I was like, whoa, he's a DO. Like I didn't even notice until I was applying, and then I was like, wait, and then I looked him up, and then I was like, whoa, he went to Western. Like it was super random, but I feel like I just wasn't like aware of it until the application cycle. So I ended up kind of tying that in. I was like, well, I like my primary care doctor and he's a DO. So like obviously like and he's from your school. Like you guys are doing a good job. So I think just tying anything that you can in, and if you have personal experience with OMM or OMT, that's a good tie-in. If you've shadowed a DO, that's also a good tie-in, but it's also not necessary. Other than that, I think also what they like to promote like during the application cycle and what would be good to talk about is just like the idea of holistic medicine and also just like treating the patient not only as a patient but as a person and looking at like different factors that might come into their lives that might affect them. So that could be something like their socioeconomic status or like what type of job are they working is does that involve a lot of strain on them. So just like taking into consideration like everything in their life and how that might come into play with whatever like pathologies they have.
Great answer and great kind of tips to think about your, I mean, the five, what was it, the five tenets, did you say, of OMM? Just to familiarize yourself. And you invoked them in your personal statement, did you say, Sophia?
I I looked over them and I was like, oh, if I feel like this resonates with me, then yes. I would also, if you do end up applying to DOs and you get interviews, like at least write them down or something. Because I've had like at some of the schools, if I had questions during my interviews that were like exactly like, okay, how does this in your like application relate to the five tenants? And then it's like if you don't know those, then you're kind of like you don't know what to do. Luckily,
Let's,
I was like,
let,
okay, I have a gist. So I think
yeah,
if you're applying to DO schools, definitely like try to get them down too.
that is, I don't, I honestly have not heard that tip anywhere. So you just made this a gold-plated Zoom session here, Sophia, with that little pro tip because that's a great. I've met kids. I've done mock interviews with kids who are doing DO interviews, and I didn't even think of that. So I'm certainly going to be adding that into my lineup going forward, and mention that to Dr. Blaine as well. Eris, do you have any thoughts about the application process along the lines of what Lee asked?
Yeah, I think Sophia touched on a lot of the good stuff, but my personal experience, I applied really late to Western and to other DO schools. Um, I think the cycle runs later as well, so I thought I could get away with it, and I guess I did. I think I sent in everything by like November. Like it was really late. Yeah. Yeah, don't be like me. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, I didn't really have to change much from my MD application. A big part of my application was, touching on holistic medicine. And I think another aspect was preventative medicine. Like half my family has diabetes, a lot of my community has diabetes. And so touching on that, I think it's a big part of the DO philosophy as well, preventative medicine. And so I didn't change too much. Like Sylvia said, yeah, definitely be aware of those tenets. It'll probably come up in interviews. Yeah, I think having an overall idea of what OMM is, you don't need to know specifics, but um, is important. Yeah, like I said, I didn't change too much, but I was fortunate in that my story kind of already fit the philosophy of osteopathic
Yeah,
medicine.
that's great. Those are great points to make. Hallie, you want to bring this kind of portion of the presentation home with that question of Leah's?
Sure. I just say when you're applying to like DO schools, just, I mean, don't lie, but if you're passionate about using your hands, talk about it. Like we use our hands a lot. And like I think that's really important. So if you touch on that, like you kind of get the gist of OMM essentially. And then for Western specifically, if any of you guys are thinking of applying to Western, they're really big on humanism. And so definitely get that somewhere in your either personal statement or your essays. They like really like that word. Google Western University humanism, ton of things will come up. And that'll really help kind of maybe tailor your application to them. I also just like general essay tip, just recommend looking up the values of the school. That helps in tailoring your application to one school as well. But yeah, just if you just talk about touch on OMM. I didn't have any experience with OMM. I didn't have any experience with DOs. And I still got into DO school. So like you don't, it's not a requirement to have experience with DOs, but do a little bit of research, make sure you know what you're talking about. They just want to make sure that you're interested in that you're not just applying as a backup. And maybe you are, but don't make it seem like you
Yeah,
are.
yeah. And then I think that's a great point to make. There was a time when applicants had to have a rec letter from a DO. Those are I don't know of a DO program wherein that is still a requirement. Did you guys have DO letters in
I
your
did
application
not.
materials?
It's you have to have a letter from a physician. It's recommended it be from a DO. But mine wasn't from a DO and it wasn't a problem.
Okay, cool, cool. Yeah, great question, Leah. Any other questions from the students on the call? Um, I think I've got 5:50 on my clock here. I know you guys are terribly, terribly busy. And can you maybe just to finish it up, you know, just a quick kind of not anticipation, but a quick assessment, if you will. I talked to M1s and OMS ones, and when I met you all in October, like poof, I just got bodied by anatomy last week or whatever. But can you give a kind of a rough idea as to harder than, easier than, about as difficult as expected when you first launched back in the summer? Or what's your kind of what are your kind of high level takeaways from as you approach the latter part of your first year in med school, Sophia?
All right. I will say, honestly, I thought it was easier than expected. And I mainly say that just because at the beginning, we had a lot of like second years talking to us and just like online, like everyone saying they have like this analogy where they're like, oh, it's like a fire hose of information. And that sounded really scary to me. I was like, whoa, that's a lot. And so I was kind of anxious starting because I was like we learned a lot in undergrad in my opinion, so like what's it going to be relative to that? And it is more information in undergrad, but to me it also goes less in depth than like a whole quarter dedicated to one specific subject. So you have to know a lot more, but then you learn it less in depth. So I just think that set us up so that our first block in med school is kind of just learning how to learn, and it's just general science like our biochem, all of that stuff, and it's just giving us the time to figure out like what works best for us in med school. And so I thought that was really useful. And with each block, you kind of have to reschedule or like rework how you're learning. But as long as you're just like open to that, then it honestly hasn't been too bad. Other than that, I will say that if you want to study all the time, like there's definitely enough information to study all the time. So it's really important that you prioritize what you need. So if that's like hanging out with your friends, or if you have a significant other or like a family or anything like that, like that's up to you to prioritize. And I think just making sure that you have those boundaries with yourself, like even with sleep. Like I make sure that I get 8 hours of sleep, but there's definitely friends of mine who like are not getting like they're getting like 5 hours of sleep. So there's definitely enough information that it can like take up your whole life, but it's up to you to make sure that you're just balancing everything.
Yeah, those are great points. Great points all. Eris, what are your kind of high level takeaways as you come down the home stretch of your first year?
Yeah, med school's tough. It's much tougher. It was much tougher for me than undergrad. But also, it's important to note that I've been out of school for, almost 3 years. And so I think getting back in the swing of things was pretty hard. And I think med school is really unforgiving. There's a lot of stuff that won't go your way, and you kind of just have to accept it and move on. And so learning how to be nice to yourself, letting things go, things like that is really important. And so, yeah, I think it's very doable. There's a lot of free time, I would say, even throughout the blocks. But it's a grind and it's a lot, and I think it's definitely harder than undergrad in my experience.
Yeah, yeah, those are great. And giving yourself some grace, I think, is a really important note to emphasize. I often invoke that notion even with my undergrads as well. So great points. Hallie, you want to wrap it up for us?
Yeah, I kind of agree with what everyone else said. I also like had this notion that it was this like undoable thing. It would be so hard. And while I don't want to lie, like it is the hardest I've ever worked in my life, this like past couple months being in school. Um, but it's doable, it's fine. I enjoy what I'm learning, so that does make it a lot better. Like sometimes you take a crappy class in undergrad and it's like, oh, I hate learning, but it's all stuff I want to learn, so it's fine. And then I think it's just really important to make time for yourself. Like my non-negotiables are exercising. Like my mental health rides on the fact that I run every morning or bike or get out to climb or make it to the ocean to go surf. So that's really important to me. And so like you just have to find a balance where you're doing the things that you need to stay healthy in order to keep up with your classes. And then I'm also Sophia, like I go to bed at 9:30 every night. Like med school is not about pulling all-nighters if you don't want to. Like you can wake up in the morning, exercise, get your class done, treat it like an 8 to 5, go to bed whenever you want.
Yeah.
So I think it's just important to find the balance. But then be aware that it is hard and you will be working really hard every day. That's okay because that's what you wanted to do.
Yep, that's exactly right. I tell kids all the time, for better or worse, this is my pre-meds, pre-dens, PA, et cetera. It doesn't matter. For better or worse, you've chosen a very demanding path for yourselves, and this is what you're signing up for. Just lastly, I'm just curious, are any of you three on, or do you even have opportunities to be on admissions teams as a first or second year, augmenting the admissions teams there at Western?
Not admissions teams. For the application cycle, for a lot of schools though, there is usually a like student panel where you get to just like talk to I guess first years. And we do have the ability to be like student ambassadors where we get to go on a panel, and that would be so if you interviewed with Western, you would have your interview, then you'd have a student panel, and so we could just be people that would talk to you during the student panel. We also have the opportunity to do like um campus tours. So I know like this coming Saturday, we're having people come to school and we can do campus tours and just do like meet and greets with people and just kind of, yeah, like be student ambassadors. So tell people about the school.
Cool, cool. Yeah, I know student. I mean, I know a student who interviewed at UCI, and the student, the M1 that she interviewed with was herself a Gaucho, 2 years removed, that I had also advised when she was here. So it's kind of cool to see that those kinds of connections happen. Well, listen, thank you to our four and now three Western U med students. This has been fantastic. There's some really great counsel in here. I'm delighted to see some of the names on this panel who I know are going to be outstanding physicians someday and incredibly competitive applicants. And I'm really delighted that they're here today and considering the DO route, because I think it's an absolutely viable and can be a really, really rewarding path to the profession that you ultimately aspire towards. So thank you, Sophia, for reaching out, helping me put this together. This is great. And please stay in touch. I'd love to, kind of track you guys now that we're in close contact. And thanks, Eris and Hallie, as well, for joining us back up again. Checking in periodically with Gauchos on the other side is a really cool thing for me to do as well. So thanks, everybody.